The streets of Harlem carried a rhythm of their own, a rhythm built on the sounds of car horns blaring in frustration, the chatter of old-timers playing dominoes on the corner, the occasional boom of a bass-heavy track blasting from a passing car. The city was alive, restless, unpredictable, and beautiful in its own way. Andy Cole had spent years away from this life, trading crowded streets for deserts and jungles, the smell of gunpowder and adrenaline replacing the scent of hot asphalt, and fried food from the vendors on the sidewalk. War had changed him, sharpened him, but it had never stripped Harlem from his bones. He moved with a quiet confidence, his 6-foot frame cutting through the evening crowd, his military posture still ingrained in every step. At his side, Rex, his Belgian Malinois, trotted obediently, ears flicking at every sudden noise, trained to detect threats before they arrived. Andy had been back for a few months now, trying to settle into a routine that didn't involve tactical operations or breaching doors in the dead of night. Harlem was home, but it wasn't easy. The city welcomed him, but the ghosts of his past didn't. That night, he had no intention of making waves. Just a quick stop at the convenience store, grab a 6-pack and some dog treats for Rex, and head back to his apartment. But fate had a way of dragging people into battles they never asked for. The moment that changed everything. As Andy approached the bodega, he heard raised voices. Not the usual neighborhood banter. This was different, aggressive, tense. He stopped, just short of the entrance, and saw them. A group of NYPD officers had a teenager pinned against the wall, their stance predatory, their hands already gripping their batons. The kid couldn't have been more than 16, eyes wide with fear, his hands up in surrender. Andy didn't recognize the boy, but he recognized the look on his face. It was the same look he'd seen in villages overseas, when soldiers stormed in, and the locals knew they were powerless to stop whatever was coming. It was the look of someone who understood they had no control over their own fate. Andy clenched his jaw. He could walk away. It wasn't his fight, but that voice inside him, the same one that had gotten him through hell and back, told him otherwise. Stepping into the fire. "Everything all right here, officers?" Andy's voice was calm, steady. Not a challenge. Not yet. The lead officer, a thick-set man with a shaved head and a smug expression, turned to face him. The name tag on his uniform read, Mills. "Move along," Mills said, dismissive. Andy didn't move. He glanced at the boy. "You okay, kid?" The teen didn't answer, but the fear in his eyes deepened. That was enough for Andy. Mills took a step closer, now towering over him. "I said, keep walking." Andy met his gaze. He'd dealt with men like this before, the kind who got off on having unchecked power, who saw their badge as a license to do whatever they pleased. He knew better than to push too far, but he also knew when standing down wasn't an option. "He break the law?" Andy asked, nodding toward the kid. The other officers shifted slightly. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from someone like Andy. Mills exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "I don't have to explain myself to you." Andy took a slow step forward, careful but deliberate. "See, that's where you're wrong. Because if this is an illegal stop, that means you're violating his civil rights." His voice stayed level, but his presence was impossible to ignore now. "And if that's the case, I have every right to question it." The air crackled with tension. Mills's smirk returned, colder this time. "You a lawyer, tough guy?" "No," Andy said. "Just someone who knows what abuse of power looks like." That did it. The fall of a soldier Mills moved first, a hard shove to Andy's chest, the kind meant to provoke a reaction. Andy didn't take the bait. His hands remained loose at his sides, his expression unreadable. Mills didn't like that. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands behind your back." Andy let out a slow breath. "You sure you want to do this?" Mills pulled his baton. "Last warning." The kid against the wall looked horrified, but Andy didn't see fear in his eyes anymore. He saw something else, something dangerous, hopelessness. Andy had seen it in soldiers ready to give up, in men who thought they had no fight left, and that was when Andy made his fatal mistake. He stood his ground, a flash of movement. The baton swung. Andy blocked on instinct, his training taking over. He didn't strike back. He didn't have to. But that single moment of defiance was all the excuse Mills needed. A second officer tackled him, then another. Fists and knees slammed into him, boots driving into his ribs. Rex barked wildly, snapping at the air, but there was nothing he could do. Andy didn't cry out. He'd been through worse. But as the handcuffs bit into his wrists and the weight of the officers pressed him into the pavement, he realized something. This wasn't about justice. It never had been. It was about power. And they thought they had won. The beginning of a war. The cell was small, the walls stained with years of neglect. Andy sat on the metal bench, rolling his shoulders against the stiffness creeping into his muscles. His ribs ached, but nothing felt broken. Outside, the precinct carried on like it was just another night. But Andy wasn't just another arrest. Mills thought he had crushed him, thought he had locked away just another nameless face to be forgotten. He was wrong. Because Andy Cole wasn't just a soldier, he was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made him the most dangerous kind of enemy. Andy sat in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, his back resting against the concrete wall. The air smelled of sweat, piss, and despair, the kind that seeped into a man's bones and made him forget what fresh air even felt like. The pain in his ribs was sharp, but he'd had worse. The real pain, the one that burned deeper, was knowing exactly what was happening beyond these walls. They were burying him. Somewhere out there, Mills and his corrupt buddies were rewriting the story. The police report would say he resisted arrest, that he was aggressive, that he reached for an officer's weapon. Maybe they'd throw in some drugs or a weapon found nearby, just to make it look airtight. They'd done it before. They would do it again. But this time, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Andy had spent years in special ops, watching governments manipulate the truth, watching men in power twist reality to serve their own interests. He knew how this game was played, and he knew how to win it. His jaw clenched as he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. Emotions got men killed in combat. Anger made you reckless. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. Harlem had been drowning under corruption for too long, and Andy Cole wasn't the type to let men like Mills keep their boots on people's necks. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first move hours passed. Maybe even a full day. Hard to tell without a clock. The precinct ran like a well-oiled machine, at least on the surface. Cops coming and going, phones ringing. A drunk guy in the next cell muttering to himself before passing out. Then, footsteps. 2 sets. Heavy. Confident. Andy didn't move as the cell door creaked open. Well, well. Sergeant Mills. The bastard strolled in like he owned the place, his uniform crisp despite the long shift. Behind him, a shorter, stockier officer. Lieutenant Harris, the type of man who didn't talk much, just followed orders. Mills leaned against the bars, arms crossed. "How's our war hero doing?" Andy didn't answer. Didn't even blink. Mills smirked. "You know, I read your file. Impressive. Special forces. A real American hero. Shame it's all gonna end like this." Andy remained silent. Mills let out a chuckle, shaking his head. "See, here's the thing. You think this is some kind of fight you can win. That the truth matters. That someone out there gives a damn about what happens to you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But you're just another nobody in a city full of them. And by the time I'm done, you'll be just another statistic." Andy tilted his head slightly, finally meeting Mills's gaze. "You sure about that?" His voice was calm. Too calm. Mills's smirk faltered, just for a second. Andy leaned forward slightly, His eyes locked onto Mills. "You're sloppy. You think you control the board, but you don't even see the game." Mills's jaw tightened. He didn't like that. "You're bluffing." Andy exhaled through his nose. "Am I?" And then, as if the universe itself wanted to prove Andy right, the sound of raised voices echoed down the hall. Mills turned, frowning. Harris shifted uncomfortably. Something was happening, something they didn't expect. The pressure builds. Andy didn't have to wait long to find out what. Minutes later, the holding cell door opened again, and this time, a woman in a sharp black suit stepped inside. Valerie Kane, FBI. She was in her late 30s, tall, with piercing green eyes and the kind of posture that said she took orders from no one. Mills stiffened. Harris took a half step back. Kane barely glanced at them before focusing on Andy. "Sergeant Cole," she said smoothly, pulling out a folder. "It seems you've made some new friends." Andy said nothing. He just studied. Her, measuring. She wasn't NYPD. She wasn't one of them. That was both good and bad. Kane flipped open the folder. Special Forces, 5 tours, Bronze Star, Silver Star, highly decorated. She closed it with a snap. And now, sitting in a holding cell on charges that don't quite add up. Mills cleared his throat. "This is an NYPD matter." "It's a federal matter now," Kane interrupted, her voice like steel. "Sergeant Cole is a veteran with extensive classified operations under his belt. That puts him under federal jurisdiction." Andy watched as Mills clenched his fists. He was losing control, and he knew it. Kane turned back to Andy. "You have 2 choices. Sit here and let these clowns railroad you, or work with me." Andy narrowed his eyes. "Work with you, how?" Kane's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Help me bring them down." Mills's face went red. "This is bullshit!" Kane ignored him, her eyes locked onto Andy's. For the first time since this nightmare started, the tides were shifting. Andy didn't trust the FBI. He didn't trust anyone, really. But he knew an opportunity when he saw one. And right now, Kane was offering him an opening, a way to fight back, a way to win. Slowly, Andy leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." The beginning of the end. Outside the precinct, the city carried on, oblivious to the war brewing behind closed doors. But things were changing. A wrongfully arrested veteran, a corrupt precinct crumbling under its own weight. And now, the FBI was involved. Sergeant Andy Cole had spent his life fighting wars overseas. Now, he was about to start one at home. And this time, he wouldn't be fighting alone. Andy Cole didn't trust the FBI. He'd worked too many covert ops, seen too many classified reports disappear into the void, to believe the federal government was in the business of justice. But he also wasn't stupid. Kane wasn't here to save him. She was here because she needed something. And right now, that was the only thing keeping him out of a shallow grave. They sat across from each other in an interrogation room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Kane had dismissed Mills and the other officers, but Andy knew they were watching. They were always watching. "I know about Mills," Kane said, folding her arms. "He's not just a dirty cop. He's part of something bigger." Andy didn't blink. "How big?" Kane exhaled through her nose. "Let's just say this goes well beyond Harlem PD. Drug money, arms trafficking, political protection, you name it, Mills has his hands in it." Andy leaned back, keeping his expression neutral. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was something else. Kane studied him. "I can get you out of here, Cole, but I need something in return." There it was. Andy smirked. "I figured as much." Kane didn't flinch. "I need someone on the inside. Someone who can get close, start pulling at the threads." Andy tilted his head. "And you think I'm that guy?" "I think you're the only guy." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Andy's mind raced, weighing the risks. If he stayed in this cell, Mills would find a way to make sure he never walked out. If he played along with Kane, he had a shot at taking down the men who had made a living off ruining lives. And if he did this right, he might just burn the whole damn system to the ground. Finally, he nodded. "Get me out of here." Kane's lips curled into a small smile. "Done." She stood, knocking twice on the door. It opened almost instantly, and within minutes, Andy was walking out of the precinct. But as he stepped into the Harlem night, breathing in the crisp air, he knew one thing for certain. This war was just getting started. The enemy beneath the badge. Andy didn't go home. He couldn't. Mills and his people would be watching his apartment, waiting for him to slip up. Instead, he took the long way through Harlem, letting his instincts guide him. The city felt different now. Darker, like something rotten had been festering beneath the surface for years, and he was only just now seeing it. By the time he reached his destination, the sun was just starting to rise. The bar was closed, the metal shutters pulled down tight, but Andy knocked twice on the side door. A few seconds later, it cracked open, and a pair of tired, wary eyes peered out. "Jesus, man!" The door swung wider, revealing Elijah Carter, former Army medic, now a bartender. "I saw what happened. You good?" Andy stepped inside, exhaling. "Not yet." Elijah locked the door behind them. "You shouldn't be here, Mills." "I know." Andy cut him off. "I need your help." Elijah hesitated, then sighed. "You always get me into some shit, Cole." Andy smirked. "Some things never change." Elijah motioned to a back table. "Talk to me." Andy sat, rubbing a hand over his face. "Kane says this goes deeper than Mills, that we're dealing with something bigger than just dirty cops." Elijah frowned. "And you believe her?" Andy nodded slowly. "I believe Mills is just the tip of the spear." Elijah exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, what's the plan?" Andy leaned in. "We start pulling at the threads." The first strike. They didn't have much to go on, but Andy knew one thing. Mills was too arrogant to cover his tracks completely. He'd left breadcrumbs somewhere, and all they had to do was follow them. Their first stop was an old contact of Elijah's, Raymond Ray Ortiz, a former cop turned PI who had a habit of collecting dirt on the NYPD. The moment they stepped into his office, Ray shook his head. "Hell no, I'm not getting involved in whatever this is." Andy smirked. "We haven't even told you what this is." Ray scoffed. "Doesn't matter. You're radioactive, Cole. Half the precinct wants you dead, and the other half is too scared to say your name." Elijah leaned against the desk. "Come on, Ray. We just need information." Ray sighed, running a hand over his face. "Jesus, you two are going to get me killed." Andy crossed his arms. "Only if we do this wrong." Ray muttered something under his breath before grabbing a thick folder from his desk. "Mills has been getting sloppy lately. Someone's been making noise, pissing off the wrong people." He tossed the folder onto the desk. Andy flipped it open, scanning the contents. Photographs, bank records, names, and then something that made his stomach tighten. A surveillance photo of Mills shaking hands with a man Andy recognized all too well, Lieutenant Victor Stone. The ghost from the past Stone wasn't just any cop. He was NYPD's golden boy, decorated, untouchable. A man with political ambitions and connections that reached all the way to City Hall. And he was the same son of a bitch who had been running black ops in the Middle East. Operations Andy had barely survived. Elijah cursed under his breath. "That's not good." Ray let out a humorless laugh. "No shit." Andy clenched his jaw. If Stone was involved, this wasn't just about a few dirty cops lining their pockets. This was something bigger. Something far more dangerous. "We need more," Andy said finally. "We need proof." Ray shook his head. "Proof won't mean shit. Not against Stone." Andy looked up, his expression dark. "Then we don't just take him down." His voice was quiet, deadly. "We burn his entire empire to the ground." The war begins. The pieces were falling into place. Mills thought he was untouchable. Stone thought he was invisible. They were both wrong. Andy had been trained to dismantle enemy operations from the inside out, to move undetected, to strike where it hurt the most. And now, for the first time in years, he felt like a soldier again. Not the kind that fought wars overseas, the kind that started them. The battle for Harlem had just begun, and Andy Cole wasn't planning on losing. Andy Cole had spent most of his adult life fighting wars in foreign countries. He'd taken down warlords, dismantled insurgent networks, and survived situations that should have killed him 10 times over. But this was different. This was home. He stood in the dimly lit back room of Elijah's bar, studying the web of information they'd laid out across the table. Bank statements, surveillance photos, confidential reports that Ray Ortiz had risked his neck to get. Each thread led back to the same tangled mess: Lieutenant Victor Stone and Sergeant Mills. Corruption wasn't new. Dirty cops weren't new. But this, a full-scale operation involving drug smuggling, arms trafficking, and political cover-ups, was bigger than any of them had expected. Stone was the key. He wasn't just part of the machine. He was the architect, and Andy had every intention of ripping it all apart. "You're thinking too much," Elijah muttered, pouring himself a whiskey. Andy exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "No such thing." Ray snorted. "Yeah? Well, you better start thinking real fast, because we just made the biggest mistake of our lives." Andy turned to him. "What do you mean?" Ray tossed a burner phone onto the table. "That was my contact in the DA's office. Stone knows we're poking around." Elijah stiffened. "How much does he know?" Ray ran a hand through his graying hair. "Enough to want us all dead." Silence filled the room. Andy finally nodded. "Then we hit first." Striking the first blow. The problem with taking down a man like Stone was that he had shields, political connections, loyal cops, money. They couldn't just expose him. They had to destroy him. And to do that, they needed to turn his own people against him. Step 1. Cut off his money. Ray had tracked a series of offshore accounts linked to Stone's operations. Dirty money flowed through them like an underground river: bribes, kickbacks, payments to politicians. Ray made a few calls. Within hours, half those accounts were frozen. Stone wouldn't know who did it. Not yet. But when he did, he'd start getting desperate. Step 2. Expose his weakest link. Stone's empire thrived on fear. The people under him, crooked cops, small-time criminals, mid-level dealers, knew that crossing him meant an unmarked grave. But Andy had been trained to find weaknesses in enemy structures, and he'd found one. Detective Brian Keller, Stone's right-hand man, a career cop with a dirty record. But unlike Mills, Keller wasn't a zealot. He was in this for the money, not the ideology. And that meant he could be flipped. Andy and Elijah found him that night, drinking alone in a run-down bar in the Bronx. They took the booth across from him, sliding in before he had a chance to react. Keller's eyes widened. "Jesus Christ." "Relax," Andy said smoothly. "We're just here to talk." Keller glanced around, nervous. "I don't know what you—" Andy cut him off. "We know you're working for Stone." Keller swallowed hard. "You think you're safe," Andy continued, "that as long as you play your part, Stone will protect you. But that's a lie." Keller's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. "You know what happens to guys like you when the ship starts sinking?" Andy leaned in. "You get thrown overboard first." Keller exhaled shakily. "What do you want?" Andy slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything you have on Stone. Every deal, every payoff, every cover-up." Keller hesitated. "If I do this, I'm dead." Andy's eyes were cold. "You're dead if you don't." Keller didn't answer. But when he finally stood and walked out of the bar, he took the USB with him. Step 3 had begun. The war goes public. The news broke 2 days later. Keller had flipped. He'd handed over everything: recorded conversations, financial records, video footage of cops delivering cash to Stone's men. And just like that, the walls started closing in. The DA launched an internal investigation. Reporters swarmed the precinct. The mayor's office issued a statement about holding officers accountable. And Stone was furious. Andy watched it all unfold from Elijah's bar, sipping a coffee as the TV blared the latest updates. "You really think this is going to work?" Elijah muttered. Andy didn't answer right away. He knew this wasn't over. Stone still had loyalists, and desperate men were dangerous men. "They'll come after you," Ray warned. "They'll come after all of us." Andy nodded. Let them. He wasn't running. Not this time. As the counterattack, Stone didn't waste time. That night, a black SUV followed Andy through the city. He led them into an alleyway, his trap, not theirs, and took out the two men inside before they even realized what was happening. A message had been sent. Stone responded in kind. The next day, Elijah's bar was torched to the ground. Elijah barely made it out alive, coughing through the smoke, his hands blistered from trying to save what little he could. Andy arrived, minutes later, watching the flames consume the last safe place they had. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Elijah wiped sweat from his brow, his face hard. "We end this. Now." Andy nodded. The war had reached its climax. Stone wanted a fight. He was about to get one. The last move. Andy knew Stone would never face justice in a courtroom. Men like him didn't go down with lawsuits and investigations. They survived scandals, buried evidence, and bought their way out of anything. So Andy planned something else, a final strike, a way to end Stone permanently. It would happen at a charity gala, one of Stone's favorite places to parade himself as Harlem's golden boy. Andy wasn't planning to assassinate him. No. He was going to expose him to the world. The plan was simple. A live broadcast, leaked documents, real-time proof of Stone's crimes, all delivered right in the middle of his speech. And this time, there would be no escaping. As Andy geared up for the final battle, he knew one thing for sure. By the time the sun rose tomorrow, either Victor Stone or Andy Cole wouldn't be walking away from this war. Andy Cole had spent his life in the trenches, waging wars in countries most Americans couldn't even point to on a map. He had seen men at their worst, cowards disguised as leaders, killers masquerading as heroes, but nothing compared to the war he was about to fight now. This wasn't about survival. This was about justice, or revenge. And as Andy stared at himself in the bathroom mirror of a rundown motel, buttoning up a stolen waitstaff uniform, he wasn't sure which one he wanted more. The final mission. The gala was being held at the Empire Grand Hotel, a high society playground dripping in wealth and corruption. Victor Stone would be there. So would the city's elite, the mayor, judges, wealthy donors who funded Stone's empire without asking too many questions. It was the perfect stage. The plan was simple. Infiltrate the event, upload the files, expose Stone live on every major news network. And if things went sideways? Andy had a gun strapped to his lower back and a blade hidden in his boot. He wasn't leaving without finishing this. Walking into the lion's den, Andy moved through the kitchen entrance, blending in with the staff. No one looked twice at a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Elijah was in a van a few blocks away, feeding him live updates through an earpiece. "You're in," Elijah murmured. "Stone just arrived. Clock's ticking." Andy weaved through the crowd, scanning the room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the low hum of laughter and clinking glasses filling the grand ballroom. And then he saw him, Victor Stone, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, shaking hands, laughing, exuding the same false charm that had fooled so many for so long. Andy's jaw tightened. Tonight, that mask was going to be ripped away. Forever. The betrayal. He reached the server's station and slipped the USB drive into the main computer. Within seconds, the files were uploading bank records, wire transfers, surveillance footage. A live broadcast link was ready. 5 minutes from now, the entire city would see the truth. But just as he turned to leave, a cold voice stopped him. "Going somewhere, Cole?" Andy's stomach dropped. Mills. The corrupt sergeant stood in the hallway, blocking his exit, his hand casually resting on his holstered gun. Andy didn't move, didn't flinch. "Didn't think you'd go down without one last fight," Mills sneered. "Too bad it ends here." Behind Mills, 2 more. Cops stepped forward, eyes gleaming with the promise of violence. Andy exhaled slowly. It was time. The Krumsers view the battle for Harlem. The fight erupted in an instant. Mills went for his gun. Andy moved faster. He grabbed a silver platter from the table and slammed it into Mills' wrist, knocking the gun loose. One of the officers lunged. Andy sidestepped, catching the man's arm and twisting until bones snapped. The second cop pulled a baton. Andy dodged, drove an elbow into his throat, and sent him crashing into a wine rack. Mills recovered, pulling a knife from his belt. "You should have stayed down, Cole." Andy rolled his shoulders, eyes cold. "So should you." Mills lunged. Andy caught his wrist, spun, and drove Mills's own knife into his thigh. Mills howled in agony, collapsing to the floor. Andy grabbed him by the collar, dragging his face inches from his own. "This is over," Andy growled. Mills's face twisted in pain and rage. "Stone, he'll kill you." Andy punched him once, knocking him unconscious. Then he turned and ran. The files were uploading. The world was about to see the truth. But he wasn't done yet. He still had to face Stone. Justice or revenge? Andy found Stone near the hotel exit, barking orders into his phone. The moment Stone saw him, his face twisted in fury. "You have no idea what you've just done." Andy grabbed Stone by the throat and slammed him into the nearest pillar. The room froze. Gasps. Whispers. The band stopped playing. Stone coughed, struggling against Andy's grip. "You think you won?" he spat. "I own this city. One News. Leak won't." Andy shoved him harder. "You don't own anything." Stone's phone buzzed. A notification. Andy looked down. The broadcast had gone live. Every screen in the ballroom was now showing Stone's crimes. The crowd murmured. Judges, reporters, socialites, all staring in shock as Stone's empire collapsed in real time. Panic set in. Stone's power was gone. Andy had won. But the rage inside him wasn't gone. His hand tightened around Stone's throat. "I should end this right now," he muttered. And he wanted to, after everything Stone had done. After all the lives ruined, all the blood spilled. Why should he get to walk away? Stone saw it in his eyes. The doubt, the temptation. "Do it," Stone taunted, his voice hoarse. "Be like me." Andy's grip tightened. Elijah's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Andy, don't." Andy closed his eyes. He had killed before, but those had been battlefields. This wasn't war. This was a choice. Andy's choice. And if he killed Stone here and now, he'd lose more than just his freedom. He'd lose himself. Slowly, Andy let go. Stone collapsed to the floor, coughing, shaking. Sirens wailed in the distance. The police were coming. And this time, they weren't here to protect Stone. They were here to arrest him. For the first time in his life, Victor Stone was powerless, and Andy Cole had finally won. The aftermath. The fallout was immediate. Stone was arrested. The evidence was undeniable. Mills. He survived, but his career was over. He'd be spending the next few decades behind bars. Andy sat on the steps outside the hotel, feeling the weight of the night settle over him. Elijah walked up, hands in his pockets. "You did it." Andy exhaled. "Yeah, Elijah studied him. You almost killed him. Andy nodded. Yeah. A long silence. Finally, Elijah clapped him on the shoulder. Let's go home. Andy looked out at the city, the same city that had tried to break him, the same city he had just saved. And for the first time in a long time, Andy Cole felt at peace. Epilogue. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Andy's doorstep. A job offer, not from the FBI, from the Department of Justice. Come work with us, the letter read. We need men like you. Andy stared at it for a long time. A new war, a new fight, a new purpose. Finally, he smiled. Maybe his battle wasn't over after all. Do you like stories of overcoming? Have you ever experienced a moment so strange or unusual that it seemed like it came straight out of a movie? Then you're in the right place. Here, we love sharing stories that touch the heart, inspire, and make you reflect. But we want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments, that special moment, or even something that made you believe in the power we have and never imagined. Who knows, maybe your experience will inspire us to tell a new story in the future. Imagine seeing your story transformed into a tale that can move other people around the world. And if you like this video, don't forget to like it. This not only motivates me, but also shows me that sharing these experiences makes a difference. After all, together we can create a space full of love, empathy, and good stories. So let's go. Like, comment, and of course, share. Who knows, the next chapter will be inspired by you.